you who have been a Bridge Club participant before, and to those of you who are brand new, welcome. We're happy to have you here. A couple real quick things for those of you who are new. We want to tell you a little bit about the Bridge Club. It is TED Talks plus a good old-fashioned book club plus a little bit of a networking event. We're hoping you're here to connect, engage, learn, and grow. Those are the 4 tenets of our company. And Catherine Haskins and I created the Bridge Club originally to get people together over really interesting conversations. And we are thrilled that this is number 25 conversation since we launched in February of this year. So we are doing a boatload of talking and appreciate all of you come to participate today. So a couple things too, we do things a little differently around here. This session is being recorded, and those who are all access members will receive a copy of the recording after we finish up today. So you can view this at your leisure over and over and over again. If you're not an all access member, you certainly can become one. Just go to our website and check it out there. And we want to hear from everybody here. So when you're not talking, if it gets a little noisy or you notice some noise, go ahead and mute yourself. And then feel free to unmute when you want to make a comment or have something that you want to share or want to ask a question. So the most important part of this is that you turn on your camera so we can see your smiling faces. This whole thing is about engagement. It's about looking at each other and talking with each other, not at each other. So as I always say, this is not a webinar. This is a conversation. So in order to have a conversation, it's really nice when you can see each other's faces. So if those of you who are able, please do turn on your camera so we can see you. So we have a really cool host today. I'm really excited that Kerri said yes to doing this with us. She has an amazing history of creating the future while those of us, most of us actually, are sitting around kind of still mapping out our plan for today. So it's really fun to have Kerri here to talk about the next thing that she sees on the horizon. And even more than that, she really brings a really huge appreciation for life into everything that she does. And always, I always walk away with a lot of energy. I hope you will as well today. So grab your beverage. The Bridge Club is happy to announce Dr. Kerri Marshall, who will be our guest host for today. Kerri.
Cheers to all of you who are bridging the future.
Cheers. Cheers.
All right, so this is going to be really fun, and I'm going to kick it off with a vote, and Catherine and Brenda, you'll have to help me keep tally here, because I'm going to take a vote before we give a framework, and then maybe we'll do one after if we have time. But I want to know who owns the pet medical record? How many of you, raise your hand, think it's the veterinarian? Raise your hand.
So for those of you that we can't see your screen, you can put it in the chat room. So that way we can do it that way too.
Good idea, Catherine.
So raise your hand now for veterinarian. Okay, who believes it's the pet owner who owns the pet medical record? Raise your hand. Okay. And who believes that maybe they haven't decided yet? But it's kind of up for play. Who believes it's the pet?
That day's coming.
Okay, so we got our poll. It looks like there's more pet owners than I thought, because of course this is a group of the future. So, you know, in human healthcare, it's been changing, and it's been changing for different reasons, I believe, than how veterinary medicine is evolving. So human healthcare, there's consumer-driven healthcare, but it really isn't consumer-driven healthcare. It's how to drive healthcare costs down by making the consumer absorb more of those costs. That's what consumer-driven healthcare really is. But it spurred the idea of exchanging medical records, facilitated it, and you can, for the exchange of medical records, you can then share medical records more easily, and they're more portable. And then with the rising specialty groups and emergency hospitals and the rising knowledge of pet parents, it's been really interesting to watch how we're evolving to fit that pet parent's mind. So, and then there's a whole controversy about pet parent versus pet owner. I choose pet parent. I realize there are legal ramifications, and I think that we can't have both have it both ways. So I think they think of themselves as a pet parent. So there's three things that I believe are driving this change towards pet parents owning their records. And I want to hear from each of you on these things. And I'll show you the framework, and then we'll have this discussion around that. So tell me if you can see this.
If you guys want to quickly go to speaker view instead of your gallery view, you'll be able to see what Kerri's holding up there.
So if you can't see it, what I'm holding up is just a picture of, you know, who owns the pet medical record and what the three things in the framework I believe are driving a dramatic shift. So culture change, and I call it customer-driven healthcare. I don't like consumer-driven healthcare because it's got negative implications from human health. Connect, support, and inform culture, which is really about the experience. So let me talk to you a little bit about that. So just to kind of stimulate your thought process around culture change. So sharing records is not just between specialty hospitals and emergency hospitals and your primary care anymore. It also includes pet sitters, boarding, grooming, training. You know, those are big pieces of that pet's life, and arguably they go to daycare way more than they go to their veterinarian. And so you should be looped in to that. So that culture change is saying, hey, my medical records need to go outside the veterinary community as well, so I need to own them. The second thing, and this is part of a larger economy called the sharing economy. The second thing is experience. It's just a better client experience, and it certainly would be much better in healthcare if you could take yours or your parents or your kids' records around with you to whatever provider, and rather than taking 30 days to transfer in between facilities, which is the law, we could do it within minutes. And so and people are looking now, this new generation, and it started with Disney, like your practice has to be like Disney. So now it's, people are buying experiences. They're not buying products and services anymore. So you can't position your practice anymore as a product and service. It's an experience, and part of that experience has to be digital. And so that's really allowed a lot of freedom in the pet parent's mind. But it also has shifted the responsibility then a little bit over to the pet parent. So we're no longer the hero, we're the guide. And that's a really important shift to understand. And that's what digital technology has allowed them to get a lot more information, whether it's right or wrong information. They're getting a lot more information outside of the purview of veterinarians unless we start to engage digitally. So that's the piece. The third piece, which is knowledge economies. There's so much information out there, right? I mean, there's genomics. There is a Dr. Google out there. There's everything. So our role is so important as the trusted advisor and guide to these pet parents in every step that they care for the pet. That means we have to move our relationship outside of the hospital and into the homes. And that means if they own the medical records, we're the translator for them. You can own something like I own horses. I pretty much understand them. I own cars. I don't. I have to go get a translator for what the heck does this light mean, right? So we're the translator, and this is a knowledge economy. We translate that knowledge and the information that technology transforms into knowledge, we transform into wisdom. So those two things, I believe, have caused this change. And what I'd like to know from the group is anybody who, there is still an argument for veterinarians owning records, right? Because of the education that we have and if you take an x-ray and then shop it around Google, you might actually harm the pet, right? So there is this argument, but does anybody have some better arguments about veterinarians owning those records? Because legally, it's still the veterinarian owns the records legally, right? There's one state, I think, that they don't. So, you know, we've got some work to do here if the group thinks very differently than where we are legislatively and legally.
Do you think, Kerri, I was going to ask you this question too, like, you know, why you thought there was such a fight, you know, over the ownership of the records? Do you think it's a fear of loss of control and fear of revenue that drives so many practices to hold on so tight?
Yeah, I think there's many reasons. I think that may be some people's reasons. There's always those hospitals and hospital owners that are very much competitive. We're all competitive. You couldn't get into vet school if you weren't competitive. So we carry that out into various forms that either help or hurt us. But and innovation is spurred by competitiveness. But I think it's more than that. I think it's I think as a group, veterinarians have a sense of responsibility. Like we take on more responsibility for that pet than the pet parent does. And I think that's what has to change. We have to say in our minds that the pet parent has responsibility for their pet. And we have the responsibility to get them information and then to help guide them through that myriad of information to result in the very best care. And I'm not saying just medicine, it's care for their pet. We have to expand our realm, and we have to get in there and guide.
And I see a lot of heads nodding. Does anybody have any specific questions or anything that's coming to mind as Kerri is discussing some of these issues here, or the question of responsibility?
One of the things that I was thinking as a technician, you know, when we write in records, sometimes things aren't always written correctly, or if somebody somebody could misinterpret what's written in the record, and I believe that could be one of the issues too. You know, so one of my questions was going to be, okay, when we're sharing information, because I know as a pet owner, I like to have copies of my blood work and any reports and any of that kind of stuff, but are the narratives of the veterinarians exempted? Can they be exempted? Should they be exempted? Those kinds of things. Can we separate what the parent can get and what should stay in-house?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And to kind of preface that, I worked at the UC Davis Primate Center for 2.5 years, and our records were public. So we had actual training in what we should and shouldn't write in the medical record and how it should be written, because it could be in the front page of the Sacramento Bee, which of course they were, in the Monkey Wars articles. So, yes, certainly with technology, I think it's going to be a journey. And I think that's the journey most companies like mine, Bark, are taking, is, hey, vaccine, nobody has any problem releasing vaccination records. In fact, that makes your job easier if it's all there. They don't have to call you for them. Nobody has any problems with that. Nobody's any problems with the appointments. I'm coming in for a wellness appointment, or I've been to a grooming appointment and all of that. It's more like the biopsies and some of the lab work. You might want to have a conversation with the results in front of them rather than just having them see the results and freak out. But I see it moving in human healthcare. I mean, I get my results as they come in right into my chart on Epic, and my doctors have to hustle if they want to call me first to get that. So, I see that you can get there, but it didn't start that way on my chart. I've been in my chart for 5 years, and I didn't get anything without talking to the doctor. Call your doctor, and then you'll get all your results. And that probably just bogged them down. So they had to streamline it. So I think we'll be going along that journey. The veterinarian sends what they think. The problem with the journey is that when you go to an emergency hospital, there's no way the veterinarian can send the right records then. So what if you had a biopsy pending that came in, and the veterinarian was off that day and didn't send it to the client, and then the dog had a crisis. So those kind of cases, I think you should keep in mind as well. There's always consequences for these decisions and rules that we make on this journey. So I'm for pushing the journey along faster, and then getting the awareness up about how we write in medical records, to your early point, and then how we view sharing, you know, what the client really has already paid for and bought. And maybe it's how the pathology report is written, maybe more client-friendly versions, and all of that, thinking about the whole ecosystem that's reading these.
I think you're right. Is everybody taught how to write in the record? What should be in the record? This is a legal document. And people forget that all the time. So I think there needs to be overall more training as far as what information do we put in the record, and how do we put it? How do we put it down?
Frame it, right? Because, you know, a lot of people put a client. Well, that doesn't mean a good one, right? It means a whole, right? You know, you're gonna have to change that, which also starts changing your culture to be more customer centric. And I think right now we have a very team centric culture and veterinary centric, and everything's about my team. I think some hospitals are farther on that customer centric journey than others. So it'll be easier because they wouldn't write those things anyway in the medical record, right? So it's an internal culture change shift as well. Anybody else have any thoughts? I'm really interested in what you guys are thinking along this, that might come up along this journey, or maybe you've already had some experiences with it.
Well, I'll say this, Kerri, my entire 36-year career, I've had this experience, and that is making sure that the next person that sees that medical record, the next doctor, the next team that's trying to help that pet, knows exactly what I was thinking and knows exactly what we were telling the client. So there is a continuity of care. To me, that's the most important aspect of these medical records being available to the client. So if they do go to an emergency room in the middle of the night, that doctor knows what that pet is allergic to. That doctor knows what that pet's been given. That team knows what to expect from the history of that pet before they start administering any treatments or recommending things to the owner, to the pet parent. So that's the way I look at this whole concern or this whole new trend. Is we have to have that information available to the pet parent, yes, but it's more than that. It's got to be available to the next person that needs to make a life or death decision for that pet.
Yes. Well said. I like the continuity of care. That's kind of a nice framework for to think about it. Because it's not always just you that's going to see that pet.
That's right.
The mobile world that we live in today, I mean, look at the people who are taking their pets everywhere they go. I mean, across continents, on airplanes, on trains, at any given time, that pet could need, emergency care or even just routine care for those people who travel, from house to house over the course of time. It's coming, right? So I'd be curious to know, Kerri, like, what kind of timeline do you see this all happening in? I mean, from your perspective, I know it can't come soon enough, but have you thought about how quickly you expect this change will take?
Just judging, that's a really interesting question, because I think change comes a little bit slow to our profession. But I view this change, this digital change, it's not really from technology. This is from an economy change. That's how I framed it. And therefore, it's going to be building. There's lots of people that see it and are building for the future. And then suddenly people are going to grab it. And that's because people are going to start. And one of the vets at one of the conferences that I lectured at said it the best. I was lecturing on kind of this whole digital mobile practice, and she goes, well, I don't really think it's worth changing my practice to adopt some of these things. They don't really need to do the appointments on the iPhone. They can call me. Well, number one, they don't want to call you, right? So I was just getting ready to answer her and kind of give some examples. And this guy was like waving his hand. So I let him. He's a very young veterinarian, just out of school, and he raised his hand and he said, hey, I'm a vet, I'm a millennial, and I'm a pet parent. And he goes, I would travel across town for somebody that I could make an appointment, on my phone. Yeah. And that's what's going to start happening. So the people that adopt these technologies will be very successful, and then the other ones will start to feel like taxis. And once that happens, the shift will happen. But I've already seen it happening, like at Veterinary Innovation Summit last year. These conversations in the hallways were all about, you know, what is telehealth? What is telemedicine? How, you know, what should we do it? And now the conversations in the hallway this year were, how do we do this? It wasn't even, should we do this? It's how do we do this? And then next year it'll be, well, this is what I've done and I've done and I've done. This is the most successful approaches to integrating this into your practice. That's what's coming. So I think it's going to be fast as people adopt these new technologies.
So I've got two things. One, you've got 5 minutes left. Second of all, the one thing that I wanted to ask though is, okay, so if it's a consumer-driven society, but we have regulations in this industry that are not allowing this, right? So we have, I mean, where does AHA stand on this? Where does the AVMA? Where does the state stand on this? Because we know from a telemedicine perspective with VCPRs, that's a problem, right? This is not going to switch overnight. So can you give some point of view on where we stand there?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard back yet from AHA. I've approached them several times over the last few months, so I believe they're probably mulling it over. They do have officially, their stance is that the veterinarian owns those records. And they worked very hard on that stance and very hard on that position. And in its time, it was right. But I think the times change. And so it will take some time to change the regulations. I think it'll take clarifying the regulations and the interpretation of them. I think a lot of it's been around client privacy. Technology is, you know, if you get the right technology, it fits within the client privacy security. The technology has had to move towards allowing the client and the customer to say, yes, I want to share. And that takes the liability off of those veterinary hospitals. There were lots of technologies early on that actually violated privacy and security law because the veterinarians give them their client base and then they sent advertising or marketing to the client base. So that's against privacy law. The veterinarian doesn't own the client personal private information. Okay, so then it goes, and what do they own? Well, they did these medical records and it was their medical records. The veterinarian, you know, wrote the medical records. But in my mind, the client paid for that. So if I paid for a consultation from my doctor, I would expect to own my consultation, be able to take it anywhere with me. So I think ownership is how we interpret ownership is kind of important. And I think I know the fight in the past was like more against, I think, Dr. Google than anything else. You know, we had this fear of all this information that's but I think part of it is our culture. We don't connect well with trainers or groomers often because we judge them. And I think Kim Pope Robinson, through her training and her lectures out there, she has nailed it on the head. To get into vet school, we had to be very competitive, as we said earlier. And we have this thing of name, blame, judge. But every time you do that with somebody, catch yourself at it. And I catch myself all the time, like, I'm name blaming and judging that person. If you change that to recognize, embrace, connect and embrace, then your whole mindset is different about it. So that's what I'm challenging people to do around this piece. The regulation, we have to engage people that will go through regulations. I mean, obviously, Danny remembers early days of Banfield. We were having a problem in California getting enough veterinarians for our hospitals. My parents were having that problem, a lot of other vets, VCA. So we all banded together and did change the law on reciprocity and licensure by endorsement. So we got together as a profession and said, this is not right. We need more veterinarians. And of course, it's almost an antitrust issue if there's no other reason to have such an onerous process to become licensed in the state. There is going to be that, to your point. There's going to be a journey here I think the first part of the journey starts with a really good analysis of the current laws, maybe a summary, and then tackling it as we go. We kind of say, what do we want it to look like in the future?
And that's a good segue real quick here. I don't want to interrupt you here, but I know Martina has, she's involved with the AVMLA and has a couple of minutes. I think
that's great.
Yeah.
So more qualified answers out there.
Can you guys hear me? I'm not sure.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So the American Vet Med Law Association, which is being held in conjunction with AVMA, is going to have a full day on telemedicine and telehealth. So if you're not already registered for AVMLA and you can come, it's Saturday and Sunday, please, please, please consider coming. We're going to cover some very important topics with some new speakers. We are going to have one guy that was doing the Alexa thing at or at VIS.
Yep.
He'll be there. There will be Lance Rosa. A bunch of attorneys/veterinarians are going to be discussing this because these are some important topics for us to tackle, and I think that's an organization that's well suited to arrange this. I've been on the examining board in Wisconsin for 7 years, so I got a pretty good handle on this.
That's great, thank you.
And then I'm going to go back and do some more surgery. So
I love it. That's great.
I know, bless her heart, she was so patient going, but me, let me talk to her anyway. So
That for some reason.
good to add that, some good insight. So Catherine just raised the little 25 minutes. So we are at the end of our 25 minutes. We always promise that if at the end of 25 minutes you need to depart and get on with your day, you can certainly do so. But I know Kerri has agreed to stay and continue this conversation for a little bit longer. So if for those of you who would like to stay, please do ask your questions and let's continue to engage. And for those of you who have to hop off now, we want to just say thank you for joining us.
And for those of you who have not tried yet to turn on your camera, we encourage you to do so as well. So I know Stanley's far, and that's okay.
It's not scary. We don't judge, right?
We don't judge. We want to see your face. It's very important.
Yeah. Now, even though Catherine and I spend hours putting our makeup on, getting ready for these things in advance, we don't expect any of you to do that ever. Just show up as you are. Okay, kidding, of course.
Go ahead.
All right. So anyway, we didn't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation because it looked like, and Kerri, you were making some really great points. I think Martina made a good point about the fact that it's becoming so prevalent that the AVMLA is now spending an entire day talking about, what some of the regulations are here. I know many of us who are still on the call have a lot of other affiliations and associations too that lend some insight. So speak up, comment, share, or not.
Is Martina still there? Can she tell me when that conference is?
I think she said it was Friday and Saturday, Martina?
Saturday and Sunday, I think.
Saturday and Sunday. Okay.
Saturday and Sunday.
I don't know, whatever that Saturday and Sunday is.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
You have to be a member to attend. We'd love to have you join us, and we'd love to have you become members. You don't have to be a veterinarian and an attorney. You can be one or the other or just interested. So we'd love to have more members and more attendance because this is an organization that can really move this subject forward.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm in surgery, so
Hi, thank you.
I love that this was so important that she actually is with us during surgery. That we've had all kinds of things. We've had kids, we've had dogs, we've had babies, we've had, spouses, we've had delivery men, but we've not had surgery. Yeah.
Two new things, cars and surgery.
Yeah, cars, exactly. Cars.
I'm going to do the horse next time, though, I promise.
There you go.
That's a good one.
I'd like to hear anybody else, any kind of concerns or questions that you have, next steps for all of us working in technology to try to deliver what veterinarians need and pet parents.
Bruce, are you trying to speak?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt Kerri. So next week I'm excited because I'm going down to a practice in Tampa. Melissa Webster has implemented telehealth in her practice. And then there's a practice in Oklahoma that also has done it. Melissa's probably a little bit ahead of the curve than others. Yeah. So I'm going to spend the day in her practice thinking about how to create a virtual exam room and then how to share that with veterinarians at AVMA.
Yeah, Melissa's a good friend of mine. So
Good.
she's using Live DVM. We've been using PetZam. So there's a lot, and every single veterinarian in the country has done telemedicine. They just haven't called it that. We all talk to a client on the phone, and that makes it telemedicine.
Exactly. And I think there are a lot of good platforms out there. And so you can be platform agnostic. And, I think veterinarians need to choose a platform, but it's really about how do you implement that? What are the policies and procedures that you put in place? How do you address associate veterinarians and their contracts when it comes to this? So on the surface, it seems pretty simple. And then when you start digging into it, you're like, oh my goodness, we have to help veterinarians and practice managers with some guidelines so that when they do select a technology provider, which I believe everybody, that should be the first thing you do. When they do make that selection, then they have some guideposts or guide rails to operate within.
I love the point of that because I'm sorry, initially to me, this all ties back, right? The whole telehealth trend as well as the medical records, because at any given moment, if you're connecting with someone, online about your pet's health, you should be able to send right over the background and the information on that pet. I mean, if we owned it, we could do that.
Yeah, but there's a bigger question here. Sorry for the plane. I'm on the airport.
Yeah.
So the bigger question is, what comprises the medical record and how do you keep it unified? Because what I see in a lot of telehealth applications and a lot of PIMs do not do a great job connecting it. Some do, some don't. So then you're stuck keeping records over here, texts over here. A lot of people still use text. That's asynchronous telehealth. And you've got the PIMs, and then you've got so there are some platforms, like I think BabbleVet's a good example, that we connect into the PIMs, but we're kind of an additional medical record pulling in all the connected health stuff into one platform. So those platforms become more and more important as you try to decide what a unified record is.
And that's an interesting thing. So who should decide what is in that unified record? Is it an AHA for their member hospitals, for example? Is this something AVMA should get involved with? Or should there be guidelines that are general and then practices accept on their own? I mean, that brings a whole new can of worms, right, to discuss in this area.
There are some states that are pretty specific about what is a medical record in their practice acts, and there are some states that are really vague. So it's all over the board. I've read every single medical record one years ago when I was working on that, but we'll probably revisit the medical records piece of the states. But I think more importantly, I think any conversation after a VCPR that you have with the client is considered part of the medical record. It's also interesting to pull in other pieces of care that are happening. So you could advise. So when she started advising the groomer on how to take care of the ears, if there's an ear infection, don't you need to understand what the groomer's doing and how to communicate that, and doesn't that become part of the medical record? So very, very interesting how we pull this ecosystem together in the long run.
And just to build on that, I think there's two trends that we're seeing in the market space. So there is, Kerri, what you said, which is housing it in a cloud solution that collects everything, which seems to make a lot of sense. But then the two big providers in the space have both publicly announced that they're creating APIs, global APIs, and that will have the ability for both read and write back. Now, the functionality doesn't exist for on-premise right now in every single case to write back, but write back is starting to happen. A lot of times unauthorized write back is what's happening now into software, but certainly the two big providers are gonna, and they could be doing it now and I just don't know about it, but they'll do authorized write back into the medical record.
Interesting. Julie and Stacy, I noticed you guys have unmuted. Did you have comments you wanted to make, or were you?
Well, I'm just wondering if something like this could be tied into the microchips. You know, the client could have that number to give if they're going to call in or something. Another provider has the scanners, they can dump into a central database type of thing.
Yes,
One idea.
you have to have the permission of the client to access, that information. Certainly not just the address and phone number, that's kind of public knowledge, but the rest of the personal information you might be accessing. So the only problem with a microchip is the dog might get lost and somebody scans it and then suddenly has access to all that information. It should be the client just shares it. So there is a, I'll give you an example. The only one I know out there is, so I'm not trying to be commercial, but the only one that I've seen out there is, so with Babble Bark, if you lose your pet, you send a message out, it's called an Amber Alert, and all the shelters, veterinarians, and anybody else with Babble Bark knows, but it's driven from the client. Saying, my dog's lost. Do you find it? This is my information and where I live. So you can get a hold of me right away, or my phone number usually. But it happens instantaneously rather than you having to get on the phone. I've lost my dog within the last 6 months, and that takes pretty much hours to try to do all that yourself. But good point. I mean, I think microchip is a great way to have an identification of a pet that's like a social security number for us. And that's the problem, is patient matching when you're sharing records from multiple sources. So I think that's a great use of a microchip, as a more unified validation that that's the same
Maybe
pet.
it's even a opt-in, for the pet parent to do that when they're filling out the application for the microchip.
Yeah, we're going to share this number whenever somebody scans it, because most of the time somebody's going to scan it and has a scanner, it's going to be a shelter or veterinarian, right? So it's going to be for a good cause. So yeah, that's a good solution to that.
Stacy, did you have a comment? Oops, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
That.
Okay. I was just, as Kerri was talking, and there's nobody better than Kerri to take this on. Kerri, I remember when you did the reciprocity, I was on that journey with you, so I'm glad you're doing this. But I was just thinking through this conversation about my own personal experience with medical records when a doctor of mine sold his practice to a hospital, and just not being able to get my medical records very easily was a very frustrating experience for me, and it just took a lot of hoops for me to get them. So I think this is a great cause. I'm glad you're working hard to let the medical records belong to the patient.
Well, thank you. In this case, the client, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that was a fun battle, right? It was a real battle, and it was a real test of proprietary. Somebody asked that question early on in the talk. Is this because we want to keep those clients? They're ours. We own them, and certainly the culture has completely changed. So we don't own the clients. They are free to go anywhere. They're going to choose us because of our experience. And the experience that we give them, the client experience. So, so we have to figure out how to make those most portable. This kind of became a pet project. I'm on the interoperability committee for Association for Veterinary Informatics, and searching for, there are some really good standards out there, but technology is changing now so rapidly that the biggest standard we have to be worried about is patient matching. When you start sharing records within different providers, that you've actually got the right pet. We had a patent in Banfield on that, and that toughest part of that whole project for record sharing was matching that's the same client, because they give, my husband's name is different than my last name. He might spell that our dog's names differently, right? When he goes into a different hospital. So there'll be lots of technical challenges, but I think it's really great. This is less controversial than I thought it would be, honestly.
So I just want to make a note that we are coming up on 40 minutes in, and getting kind of near the end of our time. So I just want last minute call for comments or questions, and then we'll ask Kerri to kind of wrap us up with a little summary or final thought. So
I'll say one thing, Kerri, and to the group. Veterinarians, I think, have to change. We've realized that we're going to have to do away with the thought process, as you pointed out, that they are our clients and only our clients and we own them. That's gone away. As far as I'm concerned, in my practices, the client has the choice to go wherever they want to. And when we get records in from another veterinarian, we do just what you're talking about. We identify that pet, we identify that with that client. We then scan every one of those records into a medical record in our hospital. Then what we do is we share that with the client, that is their medical record. We send that back to them right then and there. And I think that's a first step. Understanding we're not in competition with the guy down the street. We're in competition with ourselves. If we provide a better experience for the client, they're not going anywhere else.
Yeah.
That's really progressive. That's great.
That's really well said. Yeah. Competition with ourselves. We're our own worst enemies.
Exactly.
That's great.
Kerri, any final thoughts?
Okay, so final thoughts are just, thank you guys all for, this has been very engaging, and I think Danny actually wrapped it up pretty well. I think there's a lot of change coming, and I think I've just been amazed at how rapidly veterinarians are actually starting to respond to the change this time around. I think a lot of other change we've been resistant, and I think because the economy overall is changing and our experience with banking and all that else is changing, our minds are opening a little bit more. And I think it's going to be pretty exciting. And I learned about a new meeting to go to, which I would look up. The AVMA.
That'd be good. It's great to get everybody together, and we want to thank everyone again for coming. If you didn't hear Catherine early on, we're holding 2 fun events at the AVMA conference for those of you who are coming. I know some of you have already RSVP'd, yay. We've got Bourbon with the Bridge Club on Friday night, the 13th, which is just a gathering of Bridge Club members or prospective members to kind of network and chat. And then on Monday, the 16th of July, we are hosting our first ever veterinary industry icon event. And we are introducing Kristen Peck, who is the Executive VP and US President of Zoetis Animal Health, as our first ever Bridge Club industry icon. So there will be a fun event where Kristen will talk with us a little bit about her own journey, and people get to mingle a little bit too. So if you're having fun here and you're available on either of those nights at the AVMA, we would love to see your faces in person. And if not, we hope to see you again soon on another Bridge Club event. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks for hosting, you guys.
And cheers, everybody, to a great rest of the day.